As this class has progressed, we have studied the history of First Nations education. These gifts of knowledge that have been given to every one of us carries responsibility. It is up to us whether we decide to take these gifts to nurture or to leave them behind in this classroom. Each and every article has been relevant in my experience and my life. I have taken a quote from each article and connected it to a word that has meaning to myself as a future teacher. The topics of these articles vary from teaching styles, control of education, language, and the 60 Scoop, but they are all interconnected. The main goal is to benefit Indigenous children, young people who deserve to have the same opportunities as their non-Indigenous peers. There can be exceptions, there can be what people call success stories, but overall, there is still a ways to go, and we all have a responsibility to change the legacy of First Nations education and the systemic oppression of Indigenous peoples, and in our classrooms, our Indigenous students. Remember that you are not responsible for wrongs committed before you were born, but you cannot escape the legacy of the wrongs. The key point is that a culturally appropriate education for Aboriginal students must be holistic, and as a teacher of Aboriginal students, I must be willing to engage students at a level of discussion where who they are is more important than the content of a course. For me, the role of spirituality in learning and education, although thought-provoking and controversial, is essential in making education culturally appropriate and must exist if I wish to be an authentic, effective teacher of Aboriginal students. Two-way brokerage between Native culture and former schooling validates Native ways of learning, responds to urgent mainstream needs, and is our collective path to success in Native education. When your way of knowing focuses on relationships rather than individual people, it will be natural to see that the relationship between human, animal, plant, and earth-water aspects of creation are fundamentally those of dependency. Once you do that, everything changes. We become, in our own eyes, dependent on the health of everything else. Our obligation then must be to promote accommodation with, rather than to seek dominance over all things. Aboriginal consciousness cannot be maintained without first challenging the assumptions of modern society. Confronting the difficulties in maintaining Aboriginal consciousness in modern thought may be too much for the current educational system, but language revival, maintenance, and development remain as a challenging task for Aboriginal peoples to undertake in their quest for decolonization and self-determination. Restoring Aboriginal control over education and its entrenchment in federal Indian policy is the overriding goal of First Nations. Thus, the Aboriginal right to choose Aboriginal children's educational experiences continues in modern form rather than original form, and is protected by constitutional law. Teachers must distinguish between what is creative and help students inquire into and build upon their own experience, and what is assimilative and consequently destructive. They must consider whether they are encouraging students to take English and use it appropriately within their own culture. Only as they develop an understanding of students' needs and knowledge of students' communities will teachers be able to find this ideal cultural balance in their work. It is also essential that non-native teachers are aware of the community and the culture where they teach and live. The more aware teachers are, the more effective they can be in their jobs. Increased awareness of community will lead to culturally appropriate teaching styles and materials. Curricula and instruction must consider the sensibility of unconditional love and respect and compassion required for sustainable peacemaking for ourselves and our children in classrooms and other communities. For it is our children who will inherit the future we teach. Spirituality, relationality, continuity, legacy, values, self-determination. These are the ways in which our Indigenous students are going to flourish in a schooling system, with their values reflected and them as persons being valued. The treaty agreements were made nation to nation. Indigenous control of their education will be at the center of the change in our communities. Our children are regarded as gifts from the Creator, and the system marginalizes our beings, our blood, our children. Until the treaties are finally honored, it is up to Indigenous and non-Indigenous teachers alike to say enough is enough. We all play a role, and we all have a strand in this web of interconnectedness. Hi, and miigwech.